A billionaire CEO slaps black waitress in front of investors, unaware there was someone recording everything. Welcome to the part 2 of this story. If you are yet to watch the part 1, kindly check the description or comment section of this video so you don't miss out on this interesting story. While doing that, don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss out on our subsequent stories. With that said, let's continue. Minjun had flinched. It was barely visible, just a tightening around his eyes, but Nancy had seen it. Good. She wanted him to hurt. Wanted him to feel even a fraction of what she had felt waking up in that hospital room. Her body empty, her future erased. That's not fair, he had said quietly. Fair? Nancy had laughed, and it had sounded broken even to her own ears. You want to talk about fair? My father lost everything because of men like the one in that restaurant. He died thinking he was a failure. My mother died of a broken heart. I lost our baby because your enemies decided the best way to hurt you was to go through me. And you want to talk about fair? Minjun had taken a step closer. Nancy had taken a step back, maintaining the distance between them like it was a physical barrier she needed to survive. I looked for you, he had said. For 6 months, I turned over every stone, used every resource I had. You vanished like you'd never existed. Good. That was the point. I thought you might be dead. His voice had cracked slightly on the last word. I thought I'd lost you the same way we lost— Don't, Nancy had interrupted. Don't you dare say it. You don't get to grieve with me. You don't get to act like we lost something together. I lost everything. You lost a problem. Be honest about that, at least. Minjun had been quiet for a long moment. Then he had pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, and turned it toward her. The video had started playing, Marcus Miller's voice crystal clear, the slap, captured from an angle that showed everything. Nancy's face, Miller's rage, the complicit silence of everyone watching. I have this, Minjun had said. I can destroy him with this. One phone call and this video goes to every major news outlet, every financial publication, every investor in his IPO. Marcus Miller will be finished by morning. Nancy had stared at the screen, at the evidence she had risked everything to get, now in the hands of the man she had run away from. Why? She had asked. Why do you care about Marcus Miller? I don't. Minjun had pocketed his phone. I care about you. That's not an answer. Minjun had sighed, leaning against the brick wall of the alley. For a moment, he had looked less like the dangerous man she remembered, and more like someone who was just very, very tired. Miller Technologies wants to expand into Asia, he had said finally. Specifically, they want to establish a headquarters in Seoul. They've been negotiating with the city government, promising jobs and tax revenue. But to make it work, they need to acquire property in the Gangnam district. Prime real estate that happens to be controlled by several businesses that are, shall we say, connected to my interests. So this is business, Nancy had said flatly. You're here because Marcus Miller is bad for your bottom line. I'm here because 6 months ago, when I started investigating Miller's business practices, your name came up. You've been working at companies he frequents. You've been asking questions about him, collecting information. I realized what you were doing, and I realized why. Minjun had looked at her directly then. Raymond Johnson was your father. Miller destroyed his company. I'm here because I knew you'd eventually make a move against him, and I knew you'd get hurt doing it. Nancy had felt something cold settle in her stomach. You've been watching me. For 6 months. I've been protecting you. I didn't ask for your protection. I didn't want your protection. That's the whole reason I left Minjun, because your protection cost me everything. I know. His voice had been barely above a whisper. I know, and I'm sorry. I've been sorry every day for 3 years. But you're standing in an alley bleeding because you just provoked one of the most dangerous men in American business, and you think you can take him down alone. You can't. He has resources you can't imagine. He has connections that go all the way to— I know exactly what he has, Nancy had cut him off. I've spent 2 years documenting every illegal thing he's done. I have evidence of fraud, of stolen intellectual property, of systematic destruction of competitors. I have testimony from former employees. I have financial records that prove he's been cooking his books to inflate his company's value before the IPO. I don't need your help, and I don't need your video. Minjun had studied her face for a long moment. You've changed, he had said finally. People do that when they lose everything. That's not what I meant. He had pushed off from the wall, closing the distance between them before Nancy could retreat. He hadn't touched her, but he had been close enough that she could smell his cologne, the same scent she remembered from 3 years ago. You were always smart, always determined, but you used to believe the system worked. That if you followed the rules and did things the right way, justice would happen eventually. You don't believe that anymore. He was right, and Nancy hated that he could still read her so easily. The system protects people like Marcus Miller, she had said. It protects people like you. It's designed to, so no, I don't believe in the system anymore. I believe in leverage. I believe in making it impossible for powerful people to hide what they've done. That's the only justice people like us ever get. People like us, Minjun had repeated. You think you and I are the same now? Aren't we? Nancy had met his eyes. We're both willing to break rules to get what we want. We're both playing games with people's lives. The only difference is you're honest about what you are. I'm still pretending I'm doing this for noble reasons. You are doing this for noble reasons, Minjun had said. Your father deserves justice. You deserve justice. There's nothing wrong with wanting that. But I don't just want justice, Nancy had admitted, and saying it out loud had felt like confessing a sin. I want him to suffer. I want Marcus Miller to lose everything the way my father lost everything. I want him to know what it feels like to build something and watch it get destroyed by someone who has more power and fewer morals. That's not justice. That's revenge. Maybe revenge is just justice with teeth, Nancy had laughed bitterly. Is that what you tell yourself? When you do the things you do in your world? Is that how you sleep at night? Minjun had been quiet for a moment. I don't sleep well, he had said finally. I haven't slept well in 3 years. Something in his voice had made Nancy look at him more carefully. Really look past the expensive suit and the controlled expression. He did look tired. More than tired. He looked like someone carrying weight that was slowly crushing him. Why didn't you come after me? She had asked suddenly. You said you looked for 6 months, but then you stopped. Why? Because I found a letter. Nancy had felt her heart skip. What letter? The one you left in my office safe. The one I didn't find for 3 months because I was too busy tearing apart 3 countries, looking for you to think you might have left something right under my nose. Minjun had pulled out his wallet, extracted a folded piece of paper, worn from handling. You said if I loved you, I'd let you go. You said you couldn't be married to my world anymore. You said you'd rather be alone and alive than protected and dead inside. You said if I came after you, you'd release everything you knew about my organization to the authorities. You said you'd rather see me in prison than see me at all. He had held out the letter. Nancy had recognized her own handwriting, words she'd written in the middle of the night 3 years ago, tears blurring her vision as she'd tried to make him understand why she had to leave. I meant it, she had said. I know, that's why I stopped looking. Minjun had refolded the letter carefully and put it back in his wallet. But I never stopped caring, and when I found out you were going after Miller, I couldn't just do nothing. So what's your plan? Nancy had asked. You destroy him with your video? He goes away? And then what? You think I'm going to thank you? You think we're going to have some kind of reunion? No, Minjun had said simply. I think you're going to take the video, add it to whatever evidence you've collected, and build your case against him. I think you're going to do this your way, through the legal system, because that matters to you. And I think when it's done, when Marcus Miller is in prison, where he belongs. You're going to go back to your life, and I'm going to go back to mine. And we're going to be two people who used to know each other. Nancy had stared at him, trying to find the trap, the angle, the hidden price. You'd really do that? Just give me the video and walk away? I'd do anything you asked me to do, Minjun had said quietly. I've learned that in 3 years. I'd give up everything I've built if it would bring our baby back. I'd go to prison if it would make you look at me without pain in your eyes. I'd walk away from you forever if that's what you need to be happy. I love you, Nancy. I never stopped. But love isn't about what I want anymore. It's about what you need. Something in Nancy's chest had cracked open, just slightly. She had spent 3 years being angry at him, and the anger had been easier than grief. Easier than admitting that she missed him. Easier than acknowledging that some part of her still loved him, despite everything. But before she could respond, before she could even figure out what she wanted to say, her phone had buzzed in her pocket. She had pulled it out, seen an unknown number, almost ignored it. Then something had made her answer. Ms. Johnson? The voice on the other end had been crisp, professional. This is Detective Sarah Chen with the Seattle Police Department. I need you to come to the station immediately. Nancy's blood had gone cold. Why? What's happened? You've been accused of embezzlement, Ms. Johnson. Marcus Miller has filed a formal complaint claiming you stole $75,000 from Canlis Restaurant over the past 3 months. There's a warrant for your arrest. The phone had nearly slipped from Nancy's hand. She had looked at Minjun, seen understanding dawning in his eyes. I didn't, Nancy had started, but the detective had continued. I'd advise you to come in voluntarily with legal representation. If you make us come find you, this gets a lot more complicated. A pause. Between you and me, Ms. Johnson, get a good lawyer. This case is already all over the news. Someone leaked it to the press before we even got the warrant processed. Your name and photo are everywhere. The call had ended. Nancy had stood there in the alley, the reality of what was happening crashing over her like a wave. Marcus Miller wasn't just fighting back. He was destroying her. Publicly, systematically, the same way he destroyed everyone who threatened him. Minjun had taken the phone gently from her hand. Nancy, he had said, let me help you. He's framing me, she had whispered. He's going to put me in prison. Not if we move first. I have lawyers, the best lawyers money can buy. We can fight this. Your lawyers? Nancy had laughed, and it had sounded slightly hysterical. What happens when they dig into your background? When they find out my estranged husband is a crime lord? That's not going to make me look innocent, Minjun. That's going to make everything worse. Then we'll figure something else out. But right now, you need to get off the street. If your face is on the news, someone is going to recognize you. He had been right. Nancy had hated that he was right. She had spent 3 years building a new life, a clean life, and in one night, Marcus Miller had torn it all down. Her name was connected to embezzlement. Even if she could prove she was innocent, even if she could show the charges were fabricated, the accusation itself would follow her forever. No one would hire her. No one would trust her. She'd be marked as a criminal, even if she was never convicted. Unless she could prove Marcus Miller was the criminal first. I have an apartment, Nancy had said finally. 20 minutes from here. But if I go there, the police will find me eventually. Then you don't go there. Come with me. Minjun had pulled out his car keys. I have a safe house in the city, completely clean, no connection to my name. You can stay there while we figure out our next move. Our next move? Nancy had raised an eyebrow. I don't remember agreeing to work with you. You didn't, but you're also standing here, bleeding and about to be arrested, with nowhere else to go. Minjun's voice had been gentle, but firm. I'm not asking you to trust me, Nancy. I'm asking you to let me help you survive the next 24 hours. After that, you can go back to hating me. Nancy had wanted to argue, had wanted to tell him she could handle this alone. But the truth was, she couldn't. Not this time. Marcus Miller had outmaneuvered her, had turned her own plan against her. And now she needed help from the one person she had sworn she'd never need again. Fine, she had said. 24 hours. Then we're done. Minjun had nodded, already walking toward the street where a black sedan had been waiting. Of course he'd had a car ready. Of course he'd planned for this. That was who he was. Always 3 steps ahead. Always prepared for every contingency. Nancy had followed him, her mind already racing through options, through strategies, through ways this could possibly work. She had gotten into the car, and as they pulled away from the restaurant, she had looked back at the building where Marcus Miller was probably still inside, still charming investors, still pretending to be a legitimate businessman instead of a predator in an expensive suit. He thought he'd won, thought he'd neutralized the threat she represented. But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd pissed off 2 people who were very, very good at destroying things. The safe house turned out to be a penthouse apartment in Belltown, all glass and steel and minimalist furniture that looked expensive but unlived in. Minjun had unlocked the door with a key code, ushered Nancy inside, and immediately gone to the windows to close the motorized blinds. The view of Elliott Bay disappeared behind slats of wood, and suddenly the space felt less like a luxury apartment and more like a very comfortable prison. Nancy had stood in the entryway, dripping blood on the marble floor, her entire body starting to shake now that the adrenaline was wearing off. Minjun had noticed, of course. He always noticed. "Bathroom is down the hall," he had said, his voice carefully neutral. "First aid kit is under the sink. I'll make some calls." Nancy had nodded, not trusting her voice, and walked down the hallway on legs that felt disconnected from her body. The bathroom was as impersonal as the rest of the apartment, all white tile and chrome fixtures. She had looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her left cheek was swollen, already darkening to purple. Her lip was split, crusted with dried blood. Her eyes looked wild, desperate. She had turned on the faucet and splashed cold water on her face, hissing at the sting. The water in the sink had run pink, then clear. She had found the first aid kit, cleaned the cut on her lip with antiseptic that burned like fire, applied a butterfly bandage to hold the edges together. There wasn't much she could do about the bruising except wait for it to fade. While she worked, she had let herself think, really think, without the panic clouding everything. Marcus Miller had moved fast, which meant he'd been prepared for someone to come after him eventually. The embezzlement charges were too detailed, too specific to have been invented in the hours since she'd been escorted out of the restaurant. He must have been building a case against her for weeks, maybe months, had known she was getting close, had known she was a threat, which meant he knew more about her than she'd realized, had probably had her investigated the moment she'd applied to work at Canlis, had found out about her father, about Raymond Johnson's destroyed company, about her connection to the very first business Miller had taken down, and he'd prepared for the moment when she inevitably made her move. She'd underestimated him. That had been her first mistake. Her second mistake had been assuming she could do this alone. Nancy had closed the first aid kit and walked back out to the main room. Minjun had been on his phone, speaking rapid Korean. He'd looked up when she entered, held up one finger indicating he'd be just a moment, then wrapped up the conversation and hung up. "How bad is it?" he had asked, gesturing to her face. "I'll live. What did you find out?" Minjun had pulled out his tablet, tapped the screen a few times, and turned it toward her. News articles were already populating, all with variations of the same headline. Tech CEO files charges against restaurant employee in $75K theft. Some articles had her photo, an old one from her LinkedIn profile. Others had speculation about why someone would risk a decent job to steal money in such an obvious way. The comment sections were predictably brutal. People who didn't know her, would never know her, had already decided she was guilty. That was how it worked. The accusation was the verdict in the court of public opinion. "He's controlling the narrative," Nancy had said quietly, "making himself the victim before I can make him the villain." Yes. Minjun had set the tablet down. But he's also made a mistake. He moved too fast. These charges were filed less than an hour after you left the restaurant, which means he had them ready to go before tonight, which means he was planning to use them regardless of what happened. That suggests premeditation. That suggests malicious prosecution. That's a legal argument. I need to not get arrested first before I can make legal arguments. About that, Minjun had sat down on the couch, motioned for Nancy to join him. She had stayed standing, maintaining distance. He'd noticed but hadn't commented. I have a lawyer, someone who specializes in exactly this kind of situation. High-profile cases, clients with complicated backgrounds. She's good, Nancy, the best I found in the States. Let me guess. She's very expensive and very discreet about who her clients actually are. Yes. Minjun hadn't bothered denying it. But right now, you need someone who can navigate both the legal system and the reality that Marcus Miller has enough money to make normal legal processes bend in his direction. This lawyer understands that. She's worked cases where the opposition had infinite resources, and she won anyway. Nancy had wanted to refuse, had wanted to tell him she'd find her own representation, someone who wasn't connected to his world. But the practical part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive for 3 years on her own, was screaming that she didn't have time for pride. She needed help, and she needed it now. Fine, she had said, but I'm paying her back, every cent. I don't want to owe you anything. You don't owe me anything, Minjun had said. You never did, but if it makes you feel better to keep a ledger, keep a ledger. He had made another call, this one in English. The conversation had been brief, professional. When he'd hung up, he'd looked at Nancy with something that might have been respect. She'll be here in 30 minutes. Her name is Catherine Morrison. She's going to ask you a lot of questions, and you need to answer them honestly. All of them, even the ones you don't want to answer. Especially those ones. I know how lawyers work, Minjun. I know you do. I'm just saying this is different. Catherine doesn't just defend you in court. She builds a counter-narrative that makes the prosecution's case fall apart before it even gets to trial. But she can only do that if she knows everything. Every secret, every vulnerability, every piece of your past that could be used against you. Nancy had felt her stomach tighten. So she's going to ask about us, about our marriage. Yes. And you're okay with that? With a stranger knowing details about your organization? Minjun had looked at her steadily. I'm okay with whatever it takes to keep you out of prison. Catherine has an NDA that would bankrupt her and destroy her career if she ever violated it. What she learns about my business stays confidential. But more importantly, what she learns about you, about your father, about why you were really working at that restaurant, that's what matters. That's what builds the defense. Before Nancy could respond, there had been a knock at the door. Minjun had checked his phone, verified it was who he expected, and opened the door. Catherine Morrison had been nothing like what Nancy expected. She was in her mid-40s, black, with natural hair cut short and professional, wearing jeans and a blazer that somehow looked both casual and authoritative. She'd carried a leather messenger bag that looked like it had seen some miles, and her eyes had been sharp and assessing as she'd taken in the apartment, Minjun, and finally Nancy. You must be Nancy, she had said, walking forward with her hand extended. I'm Kate, and before we start, I need you to understand something. Everything you tell me is protected by attorney-client privilege. Everything. I don't care what you've done, who you know, or what secrets you think might hurt you. My job is to keep you out of prison, and I'm very good at my job. But I can only do it if you trust me. Can you do that? Nancy had shaken her hand, felt the firm grip, the calloused palm that suggested this woman didn't just sit in offices all day. I can try. Good enough. Kate had set her bag down on the coffee table, pulled out a legal pad and a recording device. I'm going to record this conversation for my notes. You can have a copy of the recording if you want. Now, tell me everything. Starting with why Marcus Miller thinks you stole $75,000 from a restaurant you've worked at for 3 months. So Nancy had told her everything about her father's company, about Raymond Johnson's death, about discovering Marcus Miller's pattern of destroying competitors and stealing their innovations, about spending 2 years building a case, getting hired at Canlis specifically to get close to him, provoking him into revealing his true nature at the investor dinner. About the slap, the recording she'd made, the plan that had blown up in her face when Miller had already prepared to frame her for embezzlement. Kate had listened without interrupting, taking notes in shorthand that Nancy couldn't decipher. When Nancy had finished, Kate had been quiet for a long moment, reviewing her notes. "Okay," she had said finally. "Here's where we are. The embezzlement charges are fabricated, which we can probably prove given that they were filed suspiciously fast. But proving they're fabricated doesn't automatically prove why they were fabricated. Miller will argue that you made a mistake, got caught, and you're trying to deflect by making accusations about him. He'll paint you as a disgruntled employee with a grudge. The fact that your father's company was destroyed by him 15 years ago actually works against you in some ways. It establishes motive for you to want revenge, which makes you look less credible." "So I'm screwed," Nancy had said flatly. "I didn't say that. I said that's how Miller will play it, but he's made some mistakes too." Kate had flipped to a new page. "First mistake, he hit you in front of 24 witnesses. That's assault, caught on video. Even if some of those investors want to protect their relationship with him, not all of them will be willing to commit perjury. Second mistake, the timing of these charges. It's too convenient, too obviously retaliatory. Third mistake, he's used this playbook before. If you've documented his pattern of destroying competitors, that means there are other victims, other people he's hurt, other companies he's stolen from. We find them, we show a pattern of behavior, and suddenly you're not a lone crazy person with a grudge. You're one of many." Hello, viewers. I hope you've enjoyed the story thus far. Bear in mind that this story still continues. If you are yet to subscribe to this channel, do so now and turn on your notification so you don't miss out on the next part. If you enjoyed this story, kindly drop a comment below. I will see you in the next one.